Good morning and welcome to Northwest Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm Diana Kohler and I am the worship associate this morning. Also participating in today's service are Star Austin, our virtual director of religious education, Ken Hermanot, our choir director, Alex Myers, our pianist, and Ben Gable, our congregational administrator. We are joined this morning by Cameron Young, our guest speaker, who will be talking about boundless covenants. Cameron is a native Texan, a lifelong Unitarian Universalist, and currently a seminarian at Fort Worth's Bright Divinity School. Having grown up in UU churches, Cameron developed a particular affinity for youth and young adult ministry. Prior to joining the UUA, they served as a lifespan religious educator in Fort Worth, Texas for 5 years, helping implement their congregation's first ever coming of age, spirit play, and young adults programs. Cameron also served a 2-year elected position as young adult co-facilitator of General Assembly. Cameron has a Bachelor of Music degree from Louisiana State University. They are a professional musician and classically trained singer and have performed in numerous operas, musicals, and are a member and co-founder of the Uptown Carolers, a professional Christmas caroling company. They also recorded with Grammy Award winner Leon Bridges on his debut album, and we get to hear a little bit of Cameron's singing voice later in the service. We light this chalice for our children and our youth and for us, celebrating the flame of faith lit in each of us, honoring the light that each of us bring into the world. rejoicing in the community we bring together. Our opening words are by the Reverend Joan Javier Duval. You are beloved and welcome here. Whether tears have fallen from your eyes this week or gleeful laughter has spilled out of your smiling mouth, you are beloved and welcome here. Whether you are feeling brave or brokenhearted, defiant or defeated, fearsome or fearful, you are beloved and welcome here. Whether you have untold stories buried deep inside, or stories that have forced you beyond the edges of comfort, you are beloved and welcome here. Whether you have made promises, broken promises, or are renewing your promises, you are beloved and welcome here. Whatever is on your heart, however it is in your soul this moment, you are beloved and welcome here. In this space of welcome and acceptance, commitment and recommitment, of covenant and connection. Let us worship together.
Today's Time for Wonder comes from a retelling of a Cherokee traditional story, Grandmother Spider Brings the Light. When the earth was first made, it was very dark, and the animals were afraid. One day, Bear said, I have seen the light on the other side of the world, but the people will not share it. Perhaps we could steal some for ourselves. And the others thought this was a splendid idea and started to discuss who should go first. I'll go, said Fox. And so Fox went and stole a piece of the light with his mouth. But it was so hot, it burned his mouth and he dropped it. And to this day, Fox has a black mouth. Possum tried next. He wrapped the light in his tail and he tried to drag it back, but it was so hot, he dropped it. And that's why Possum has no fur on its tail. Crow said, let me try. And he went off to steal the light, but when he got close, it singed all his feathers and he turned black. He was so afraid, he ran away. Finally, Grandmother Spider said, I will go. When she reached the light, she was surprised by how hot it was. She thought of a plan and began to spin and spin with her silky web. Soon she had enough for a bag. She approached the light and, quick as a flash, tucked the light into her bag. And when she got back, the animals were triumphant. Hooray for Grandmother Spider, they all shouted. And Grandmother Spider was happy to give them the light. She said, we should hang this light in the sky so everyone can be warmed by it. The other animals thought that was a good idea too, but how do we get it into the sky? I will go, said Vulture, and he took the bag of light, he put it on its head, and it was so hot, but he could stand it. He flew higher and higher, and the bag got hotter and hotter. He climbed higher, and his feathers turned black. Still higher, and the feathers on his head burned off. Still higher, and his head turned red. And at the last possible second, he threw the light into the sky as hard as he could. And the sun hung bright and beautiful and warmed everyone in the land. Please join me in enjoying hymn number 324, Where My Free Spirit Onward Leads.
Today's reading from the Reverend Dr. Rebecca Parker. To begin, a story. 8 years ago, I moved to California to become president of Star King School for the Ministry. Truth be told, I was feeling proud of myself. Captain of my ship and master of my soul, I had valiantly charted my course to become first a cellist, then a minister, and now an educator. When I got to California, I discovered I had a posse of distant cousins I had never met. One of them, my cousin Eldon Ernst, was dean of the American Baptist Seminary at the Graduate Theological Union in Berkeley. He proposed an Ernst family reunion, and so we got together. When we arrived in the driveway of cousin Sally Ernst's home, I got the first introduction to my distant cousins by reading the bumper stickers on their car. One said, "If you want peace, work for justice." Another, "Teachers do it with class." Another, "Live music is the best." And then there was one that said, "If you love Jesus, tithe." Inside, over Jell-O salad, homemade rolls, and tuna casserole, reminiscent of every church potluck I had ever attended, we said hello to one another. Here was Sally, a minister of religious education and a graduate of Pacific School of Religion. And here was Mike, a French horn player and a high school music teacher. And Eldon, a seminary dean. And David, a United Methodist parish minister. Every single one of my distant cousins was a musician or a minister or a teacher, and several were all three. Not only that, the ministers were all liberal social activist types with an intellectual bent, and all the musicians were classical. Apparently, I had never made any choices at all. My life was given to me. I did not make myself, and this is how it is. We receive who we are before we choose who we will become. As human beings, our lives begin and never leave the soil of this earth that shapes us through blood, kinship, genes, culture, associations, social systems, networks of relationships, and extended communities. Even when we do not directly know the people whose lives are linked with ours, our lives unfold in relationship to theirs. And this is how it is with covenant as well. We are born into relationship before we shape relationships by our conscious intention. We inherit covenant before we create covenant. We do not make ourselves. We are given the gift of life, the gift of the earth that sustains life, and the gift of one another here, now. And in all the generations leading up to now, as the Brian Wren hymn sings it, we are not our own. Earth forms us. Human leaves on nature's growing vine, fruit of many generations, seeds of life divine. Covenant making must begin with the question, what have we been given? What is the covenant we are already in? Feel free to sing along if you know this one. The more we get together, the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. The more we get together, the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. Such simple yet such prophetic words from the timeless children's troubadour, Rafi Kavukian. I was part of the quintessential Rafi generation, also known as Beluga grads. Most folks about my age, and probably most who raise kids my age, will recognize this hit, among others, such as Baby Beluga and Down by the Bay. The Armenian, Egyptian, Canadian singer remains an icon in the world of children's entertainment. But what is perhaps less known about him is his decades of philanthropy and work in advocacy. At one point, an ambassador to the UN and extremely vocal in issues such as climate change, racism, and wealth inequality, his most concerted advocacy has remained in the area of child honoring. His foundation is called the Rafi Foundation for Child Honoring. Instead of a mission statement, the organization is characterized by, get this, a covenant and 9 principles. Now, where have we heard that before? To paraphrase the covenant, we find these joys to be self-evident, that all children are created whole, endowed with innate intelligence, with dignity and wonder, worthy of respect. We affirm our duty to nourish and nurture the young, to honor their caring ideals as the heart of being human. We commit ourselves to peaceful ways and vow to keep from harm or neglect these, our most vulnerable citizens. The 9 principles: respectful love, diversity, caring community, conscious parenting, emotional intelligence, nonviolence, safe environments, sustainability, and ethical commerce. Rafi is not a Unitarian Universalist to my knowledge, but it is certainly curious that these documents seem to be layered in UU theology. After all, as a non-creedal faith, our principles and especially our covenants are what bind us theologically. We are at our very center a covenantal faith. Unitarian Universalists come together not by our shared doctrine, not by, we believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth, etc., but by our shared covenantal commitments we make to one another. What is clearly evident about this covenant for child honoring is that it's made not necessarily for the benefit of those who authored it, but those who are much younger and the not yet born. What kind of faith might we be if we were to universally treat our covenants the same way? As Rebecca Parker pointed out in today's reading, we inherit covenant before we create covenant. As the story goes in the Hebrew Bible, a covenant was created between God, Moses, and the Israelites to help liberate them and protect them for generations to come. I will be your God and you will be my people. Since our faith is at least ancestrally a Jewish Christian one, I believe this to be one of the many covenants that we have inherited, this one between God and Moses and the Israelites. It arose from a people held in captivity under an oppressive empire in dialogue with what they saw to be the divine. Whether we realize it or not, this ancient document has influenced us, our theology, and the way we seek to create justice in the world. Parker goes on to write, we receive who we are before we choose who we will become. As human beings, our lives begin and never leave the soil of this earth that shapes us through blood, kinship, genes, culture, associations, social systems, networks of relationships, and extended communities. Even when we do not directly know the people whose lives are linked with ours, our lives unfold in relationship to theirs. This philosophy resembles our seventh principle, recognition of the interdependent web of all existence. In this time of pandemic, when our global interdependence has never been more recognizable, it's worth restating this as we continue to live in covenant with one another. Despite being young and relatively low risk to COVID, many of us, myself included, have done our part in remaining socially distanced over the past year. Speaking for myself, I did this not just with vulnerable loved ones in mind, but also the many older and at-risk folks I did not know, the strangers. I remember right at the beginning of the pandemic, biking along the Trinity Trail in Fort Worth, Texas, where I live, and coming across an elderly man. And suddenly, like a wave, I was hit by his vulnerability, his undoubted trepidation between knowing exercise and fresh air is needed for his quality of life, yet the clear apprehension of being out in public and around people, even before we knew how effective outdoor air was at filtering out coronavirus particles. In this moment, I felt my own profound sense of interconnectedness with him. I'd like now to turn to another facet of our population, our children. Those who cannot advocate for themselves, but nevertheless should be at the center of our covenantal relationships. As our UU congregations begin their deliberative processes of reopening, I've oft heard something to the effect of, well, we're all vaccinated now. I think it's important to remind folks that we have a whole populace of unvaccinated individuals embedded in our communities. Yes, most scientific evidence we have would suggest that children are quite low risk when it comes to COVID-19, but it's certainly not no risk. What's perhaps more bothersome is that their needs are often omitted from these dialogues around reopening and really the ecclesial and public sphere in general. I recently met with leadership from a congregation in a galaxy far, far away who was part of an aging community and had resigned themselves to the fact that that would continue to be the dominant demographic. While this was probably true and there was nothing wrong with that, they couldn't be bothered with a conversation on how to be more inclusive to young families. Since they couldn't seem to attract them in the first place, they didn't seem to think it was important, missing the point that the conversation was not one about marketing to young people, it was one about living our values. Raffi, in a TED Talk, says, a unifying principle for societal change is that if you make the world work for the infant, it works all the way on up. The reverse isn't true. The same can be said of our churches and of our covenants. We must covenant for the interconnected web. We must covenant for our children, to covenant with love and hospitality, which knows no bounds. The interdependent web, along with the rest of our 7 principles and 6 sources, are part of the covenant of our faith. They can be found in Article 2 of the bylaws of our Unitarian Universalist Association, which uses explicitly covenantal language. Article 2 is the living covenant of our faith, key word being living, and therefore subject to change. As a liberal faith tradition, we believe that revelation is not sealed and that divine truth is in constant dialogue with all of existence, and new revelations continue to emerge. Recently, the UUA Board of Trustees appointed an Article 2 study commission charged with reviewing our principles and purposes to determine what, if any, changes to them might be relevant to our evolving context and mission as a faith. Among the proposed changes, an eighth principle of Unitarian Universalism. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. I understand that Northwest UU recently made a huge move in endorsing the eighth principle. That's no small feat. Our pluralistic faith, full of a range of opinions, personalities, and the democratic process to boot, make it quite difficult to make concerted value statements like that. That's worth celebrating. Just a few weeks ago, the Article 2 Study Commission hosted a panel centered around covenant featuring UUA President Reverend Dr. Susan Frederick Gray, past President Reverend Bill Sinkford, and Reverend Meredith Garman. During this discussion, Reverend Garman pointed out that we're not necessarily unique in being a non-creedal faith. So are the Baptists and the Disciples of Christ, whose seminary I currently attend in Fort Worth. We are, in fact, more radical in being canonless. We don't have the 5 books of the Torah, the 39 books of the Tanakh, the 66 books of the Protestant Bible, the 73 books of the Catholic Bible, or the 79 books of the Orthodox Bible, nor do we simply add all the Vedas and the Sutras and the Quran from other traditions. Ours is a boundless source. We don't have a set of texts that are definitive for us. We are all the time discovering new texts, books, poems, and essays that speak to our hearts and our souls. But it also gives us a need to be defined, and those are our covenants. While covenants arise from the needs of community in the here and now, they are also crafted with an eye toward the most vulnerable and a clear vision toward the future. As Star Austin mentioned in her story, our covenants are our sun in the sky and all of us working to hang it up there. While our covenants explicitly name members of our congregations and faith at large, that is by no means who they are limited to. We must covenant for the interconnected web. We must covenant for our children. To covenant with love and hospitality, which knows no bounds. We are brought into sacred covenant in some form from the time we are brought into this world. Rebecca Parker points out to us that, based in its Latin etymology, covenant most simply means to come together. And one of my earliest lessons on covenant came from a song. The more we get together, 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 the more we get together, the happier we'll be. 'Cause your friends are my friends, and my friends are your friends. The more we get together, the happier we'll be. Amen.
Amen.
Break not the circle of enabling love, where people grow forgiven and forgiving. Break not that circle, make it wider still, till it includes, embraces all the living. Come wonder at this love that comes to life, where words of freedom are with humor spoken, and people keep no score of wrong and guilt, but will that human bonds remain unbroken. Join then the movement of the love that frees, till people of whatever race or nation will truly be themselves, stand on their feet, see eye to eye with laughter and elation.
We extinguish this flame, but we keep its light in our hearts. With his message of love and justice, taking it outside this sacred time and place, to the world we live in, until we are together again.